center in ASU, and because of her, we are having a program, an event, and a group of the students in ASU. So I welcome Indulata ji online Ana Vihara. We are glad to have you here. Indulata Prasad is an assistant professor in the Women and Gender Study in the School of Social Transformation at ASU, Arizona State University. Her research and scholarship include South Asia, social movement, Dalit studies, oral history, social mapping, gender, caste, and land rights. She's also the recipient of the 2021 Bluestone Rising Scholars Award. Her publications include Casting Space, Mapping in Dynamic of Untouchability in Rural Bihar, India, 2021. Towards Dalit Ecologists is 2022. Her forthcoming book in fall 2025, which is also the title of this talk, map the longitudinal impact of the Bodhgaya land movement of the late 1970s, which openly embraced feminist concern and was successful in challenging the hold of a feudal monastic institute that integrated Brahmanical caste hierarchies on the region, agrarian, politic economics in institute and normalizing the agoristic slavery in the region. It seeks to foreground the long legacy of Dalit mobilization in the region, to challenge the Dalit emancipation and the radical possibilities that feminist mobilization have to offer. Currently, Indulata Prasad is collaboration of Dalit Bahujan youth from her research community to create an online archive and a short film on the legacy of the movement. The collaboration seeks not only document, but also engage questions of the rural-urban digital divide. So I welcome Indulata ji, and I request you to begin your talk. Thank you so much. We can't hear you. Indulata ji, you need to unmute. Yeah. Unmute yourself. It's like, if you look at it, there is a 3 dot and just click unmute.
She is unmuted now.
Yeah, she's in here. You can begin your session. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint on.
Yeah.
Are we set? Can we see the?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to thank Panteji for reminding us the importance of mindfulness and equanimity for a balanced mind and to practice Buddha's middle path. I think it's a reminder that I've certainly benefited from today. I also want to thank Kalpana ji for working and for inviting me to talk on this occasion. It is an honor to be presenting my recently completed book, Feminist and Anti-Caste Mobilization in the Bodhgaya Land Movement. We Achieve Great Feats by Routledge Press, and the publication is supposed to be out in fall 2025. That is the fall of this year. Now, in my talk today, I will present Dalit women's perception of rights to redistributed land acquired following a decade-long peaceful land movement in Gaya district of Bihar, India. I draw on Dalit narratives to show that women's right to land in the global south is not analogous to the perception of land ownership in the global north. In fact, Dalit women's rights have to do more with caste, class, religion, and dominant culture, and are rarely about individual rights. Along with gender-sensitive statistical data, effective advocacy for Dalit women's rights to land entails the use of ethnographic insight, which can best provide situated understandings of land or understandings of what land ownership means for historically marginalized groups. In the case of the Bodhgaya land movement, oral narratives of Dalit women allow for a comprehensive accounting of the transformative potential that ownership of productive assets such as land helps engender. In fact, in my work, I show that I conclusively demonstrate that securing land productive assets was fundamental to ending the centuries-old practice of agrestic slavery, or as it was known in the region, Kamioti, in that region. So I'll try to give you a context of how and where I came into this project. I'll briefly touch upon the methodology I used to study this, and then through the use of photographs, I'll go over what I think was key findings or key insights that this over a decade-long research yielded. Summer of 2009 was a crucial year in my doctoral research as I set out to Bodhgaya, a small town renowned for its Buddhist heritage sites, located in eastern state of India. I intended to explore the possibilities of conducting ethnographic research on the long-term impacts of women getting land due to Bodhgaya land movement. It had not rained much in Bihar that year. Poor monsoons, however, worked to the advantage of this journalist turned cultural anthropologist, as it ensured that she got to speak to the women, men, and children who, under normal monsoon season, would have been occupied with agricultural work. But even before my trip had started, the grassroots activists accompanying me to the field clearly rejected the idea of going to the field in the white Toyota Corolla that I had hired for fieldwork purposes, declaring it unfit to take us to the places we were headed towards. He asserted that only a marshal, which closely resembles a jeep, and that's how it's referred in that part of the world, could take us where we wanted to go, as the homes of the women I was so eager to meet were located at the outskirts of the villages, and my fancy car might get us all stranded in the blistering heat. For what becomes evident at first, as the absence of infrastructure does not stop there. The place where the women I intended to meet to explore the possibility of ethnographic fieldwork did exist. But the landscape they inhabited embodied symbols of what it meant to be abandoned. I want to say and assert, kind of emphasize here, that dominant subject positions, my dominant subject positions, my feudal inheritances, dominant caste with upper middle class upbringing and education had blunted my sensibilities to discern the caste class factor that was at play here. My excitement was further muted by women's statements such as, "Are we just fighting for agricultural land? We have a long struggle. Our fight with the government, with the state, is on the level of the everyday." Besides hearing their narratives and statements, I experienced, probably for the first time, what it meant to occupy a space that embodied symbols of being deliberately forsaken. And so I'm going to describe now what in my entry into the field, what I saw or what I kind of say as overt signs of abandonment. The paved road ended exactly where one would have to turn toward the Dalit part of the village, forcing me to leave my vehicle and trek the remaining distance under the blazing sun. The electric high-tension wires swerved past the Dalit part of the village. Women noted that their pleas to install a small transformer near their homes had largely been ignored for the past several decades, raising questions like, What gets deemed as worth connecting and lighting? What gets designated as destinations worth reaching, to vis-a-vis destinations best avoided or obscured? Although the Dalit women's families each owned an acre of land, their houses were located at the outskirts of the village and by all yardsticks remained segregated from last member households, as well as from the basic common amenities like school and healthcare. Even the village meeting hall was located in the part of the village where the privileged caste people resided, thereby raising questions about the nature of Dalit access to these resources that were meant for all. So the initial takeaway was that caste-based discrimination was still rampant in the area, where Dalits have successfully struggled to get the right to land or control over land, not just legal right. As the women I sought to so eagerly meet reminded me time and again, the radical success was merely a small achievement, perhaps an enabler in the long struggle to overcome caste-mediated gender-based discrimination. Here it must be noted that while inherent social, religious, and patriarchal biases affect all Hindu women in some form or the other, irrespective of their social, cultural, economic, and caste status, Dalit women in particular are subjects of multiple forms of discrimination due to their marginalized caste, class, and gender positions. So theoretically, what I've noticed or what I've come to understand is that the perception of caste as an intrinsic feature of Indian society works to mask the violence that is inherent to it for those who live it. The myopic view of caste severely limits any possibility of accounting for Dalit experiences and Dalit efforts to challenge their marginality and rejection into resistance. To overcome the limitation that literature on caste and gender presents in theorizing Dalit women's experiences, I drew on Dalit studies, critical race theory, third world feminist theorizations, in particular intersectionality theory, which proposes that socially constructed categories are not only linked, but also mutually construct each other. They co-constitute each other. I also use standpoint theory, which privileges situated knowledges. And in a bit, I'll show you what I mean by that or how I brought that into the research. Knowledge and lived practices of a community. In my work, I have tried to understand the shifts in Dalit women's experiences through the relationship to land. This required an engagement with complex histories of caste as a form of identity, as an economic structure. So caste as a form of identity, caste as an economic structure of disenfranchisement and exploitation, but caste also as a spatially structuring form. In addition, including caste as a significant category of social life requires historicizing the hidden histories of hurt and humiliation to account for the multiple and changing manifestations of caste within society. So caste not as fixed, but something that is constantly changing. My effort thus far has been to convert what we call difference as a standpoint such that it facilitates a consistent questioning of the social relations that produce that difference. Privileging Dalit women's voices in the land movement therefore allows for a reading of the movement both as a feminist movement as well as a movement for Dalit assertion in the region. It connects both the oppressive legacies and the radical potential that the social movement have to offer for historically marginalized groups. Similarly, putting Dalit women's voices in conversation with literature on development underscores several key factors that are missing from the development and land rights discourse. For example, land rights are critical for Dalit women's empowerment as they provide the bulk of the agricultural labor. By this mean that people who are come from the landed caste or dominant caste, women from that community, unless they are facing financial hardship, they do not usually or normally work on the land. And so having that information or that knowledge foregrounded becomes important in advocating for land rights. Second, with historically low rates of literacy, Dalit women have argued that instead of cash and aid assistance, the government must provide them effective control over the redistributed land so that they can not only meet theirs, but also their families' subsistence needs. And this comes when when the Right to Food Act was being legislated in 2013, and my interlocutors said that they don't need to subsidize our food or don't need to give us food. We can grow our food. What we need is land so we can become self-reliant, self-sufficient. Third, the narrative cues us to the challenges that Dalit women face to take over effective control over land they struggle for, thereby allowing us to better advocate for their rights. Now, even though race is based on skin color and caste is based or understood as based on birth within Hindu religion, the cross-pollination of theories pertaining to race and caste appears tenable, or as both are forms of social stratification that, despite not being based on reality, there's no reality to it, nevertheless, they have lived social consequences. Although the debates on race and caste have been muted in the recent decades, one cannot overlook the historical legacy of collaboration that has existed between people of color in the United States and Dalits in India, starting from W.E.B. Du Bois and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and extending to the present-day efforts of Dalits to support and ally themselves with Black Lives Matter movement. Sorry. The international collaboration effort mirrors Dalit and US Black feminism's commitment to fostering empowerment of groups within an overarching context of social justice. Such a context not only requires an understanding of power that constrains African American women within the US context and Dalit women in the South Asian context, but also contributes to the understanding of how such domination can be resisted. So that was the theoretical challenge. Now the methodological challenge, that is, how do you account for the conspicuous circumscribed existence that I described and I talked about briefly that marks Dalit existence? Apart from theoretical challenge, accounting for Dalit women's experiences proved to be a methodological challenge as well. More often than not, traditional methods of interviewing fail to solicit detailed responses and often did tersely and rather impatiently with a yes or no response. The problem, Dalit women told me much later in my fieldwork, was that their dominant experience was that of being spoken to. And it felt odd to them to be asked to express their thoughts and views time and again. Women noted that, barring the activists during the time of the land rights movement, they had yet to come across anyone who wanted to know their experiences, their opinion on any issue, or even bothered spending so much time amongst them. After all, even today, one takes the road that leads to Dalit homes only if one lives there or has a very good reason to go there. And this was reminded to me by the activist and my interlocutors from time to time. Caste-based discrimination thrives in rural India through what has been referred to as hidden apartheid. Each village continues to be segregated along caste lines, with Dalit homes normally located in the opposite direction to which the wind normally blows. The logic being that if the wind blew from the direction of Dalit homes, it would ritually pollute the caste Hindus. The space that the Dalit subject occupies, therefore, provides insights into both the subhuman treatment meted out to Dalits in contemporary India context, as well as change over time that has taken place through the interplay of acts of Dalit assertion and resistance to it. The spatial arrangement of the village vis-a-vis Dalits is testimony to the centuries-old efforts to perpetuate dispossession and contain notions of contamination and purity. Here I have found E.L. Wiseman's assertion that it is through architecture that we get a sense of modern of what the modern, postmodern condition is. One that embodies violence as a norm, particularly useful here. The continued presence of segregated space following caste lines, particularly Dalits vis-a-vis caste Hindus, and the continued withholding of resources that were historically denied to Dalits are symptomatic of caste-based exclusion, discrimination, and continuation of Dalits of untouchability by other means. So what I'm going to do is basically show the methodological photographs that kind of give you an insight as to what I was doing. I lived with Abhuyan Dalai in Bihar for an extended period of time, over a period of 2.5 years, and I keep visiting the village and the region back because I work with the kids that were my daughter's age at that time. And I'll show you. So this is my daughter. This is the social mapping that I was trying to describe in my writing, where I'm asking my interlocutors here to draw their space before and after the movement. Why I have this picture here is because I just want to say that fieldwork was not something that I went and did, that people accompanying me were very helpful. In this case, my daughter, I think her relationship to people around were Nani. And so she was very encouraging and asking her that, Nani, this is very easy. And I share this because most of the women were holding the chalk for the first time, and they were laughed at by caste Hindu men and women. And the women said that when we can actually get the field to grow corns and field to produce herbs, this is just another challenge. And that rhetorically, or kind of countered the men by saying, did you start writing from the womb of your mother, to kind of allude to the fact that these are skills that needs to be learned over time. And so that was an exchange that I thought was important and reminded. This is they're trying to draw their space. This is just like their homes, which they're trying to draw on the ground. And the tape recorder there is recording their stories. This is again women trying to map what was the different features in their landscape. This is the map of the village, and if you see, this is actually the map. They have drawn a well, the well that was there, the only well that was there in the village, and the lines that are coming out of that are basically thorns that was placed on the map on the well when the movement was strong, when the movement was going on by the caste Hindus. This is the well that was drawn. So you can see a kind of depiction here, and this is the actual well that's there. This is again mostly used by caste Hindus and not by Dalits, even though so that is another way in which resources are technically available, but they don't usually access this. This is a depiction of just the Dalit part of the village. There are different trees. The palm tree is very important to them. The banyan tree is very important to them. The mango and the the neem trees were important, and that was marked. They also marked wells. They also marked hand pumps. In casting space, I basically discuss about how their relationship to natural resources changed over time, given that over time after they got the land. This is a map. This was very interesting, and this was captured by my spouse, who was also visiting, and he was entertaining the men, because it's hard for men not to get involved. And even though I just wanted it to be a women-only space, they drew their own maps. And if you see the maps that were drawn by the women, this is just the Dalit part of the map, Dalit region, just the old part of the village. And this is the entire village drawn by an interlocutor of mine. And the narrative that was going on, or how he explained, is basically he focused on the roads or the routes that go or snake around the village. And to me, I'm reading that as men, because of the huge or the large, almost 99.9% rural urban migration taking place. And so the men's map were around the roads, and they were not interested in going into detail about whose house was where, what were the natural resources, what are the routes that they take, which is being depicted in this map, which was drawn by women. And of course, women took more time than men. They were very detailed. The discussions, counter arguments, and they tried to include a lot of inputs that were coming from the elderly women folk. This is mostly drawn by the man who is explaining it. So those were social mapping pictures, and that was one way to that was one way in which I have sought to understand what was going on, given the limitations that I faced due to my subject positions. Therefore, I used social mapping to complement the usual interviewing methods. Social mapping not only provided me with a common sense geography, but also evoked what Dolores Hayden has called power of the place, which nurtures citizens' memories and allows for stories of collective struggle and discussions of the history of the area to emerge, as well as jokes and gossips. Taking a cue from Massey's assertion that it is not just the spatial that is socially constructed, the social is spatially constructed too. I sought to use this method to map the transformation that followed the land struggle in Dalit lives. So what it's discussed in the paper that won the award, how Dalits have been able to move from the southern part of the village to northern part of the village, how the new parts of the village, the ideas of spatial segregation has been drastically transformed. The inherent logic is there, but because of the proximity of the houses, that logic seems to be dented a bit, not totally diminished or taken over, but that logic is there. But it's for example, if a non-Dalit house and a Dalit house is sharing a wall, the walls, the common wall is almost double the size of a normal wall between two homes, to kind of indicate how it is different, to kind of indicate that we don't want to see you, or the logic of untouchability has mapped into this aerial bifurcation or division that's going on. So in the pictures depicting the well, the only source of potable water at the time of the movement, the solicited stories of how caste Hindus tried to demoralize Dalits by preventing them access to it, and covered it with thorny twigs and guarded it 24/7. So stories became that we had to actually go to the river to get water during the movement, or we had to walk 2 kilometers or to get water. So that's what I'm trying to refer to and give a sense of how I was able to get women's stories, what is important to women, through the use of this method, because nobody was interested in talking to me. Nobody was interested in listening, telling their stories in the way one would normally receive information. And this is also coming from Gopal Guru's assertion that about Brahminical intellectual Brahmins and laboring non-Brahmins, or intellectual non-Dalits and laboring non-Dalits. And so trying to understand how do we then account for knowledge that is produced in communities that has not historically been recognized as knowledge producers, as sites of knowledge production. And so this was one method that I tried to get. The second I want to describe, and how I went about trying to understand how land impacted Dalits, is to understand, is to draw on Maya's narrative, who, unlike most not only had so most people, there are different relationship to land. They had mortgaged, somebody had, the non-Dalits had taken over the land, they had lost their land. Different kinds of relationship was there with the land. But Maya was able to retain that land, and she identified herself as Puranka Log. Now, Bhojpuri Puranka is old. I'm sure Purana in Hindi is old. And I'm sure some iteration, Purono in Bengali is old. And I'm wondering in other languages, Puranka might, in some form, signifies old. This term was primarily used by elderly women and men in the community. And I use this Puranka log is because I think there was also this questioning. My interlocutors had this questioning: is she believing me? Does she believe in what the story I've said? Because our stories have not been seen as sites of knowledge production, as true, or we've been dismissed. And so that assertion kind of led me to believe that that was also a way of telling me or signaling to me that the people had the requisite age and experience to authoritatively comment on the issue that I intended to study: long-term effects of the land movement and the transformation, the social transformation it had helped engender. Maya identified herself as a former bonded slave of the Bodhgaya Mutt, a 500-year-old Hindu monastic institution in the area. She's also a grassroots activist of what she calls the Kranti Ladai. Kranti is revolutionary. The Bodhgaya land movement. She had courted arrest, gone to prison to secure her right to land that the Mutt had illegally held on to. Things had changed drastically following the land movement, she noted. Badlao is change in Hindi. Also in Bhojpuri and Maghi is a very big word for me, she had said, laughing. To understand what Maya means by Badlao, because that's what I was trying to say, one needs to start by engaging the legacies that she alludes to in her narrative. It takes us back to the small town of Bodhgaya, from which both the religious institution and the land movement gets its name. I do want to kind of say that Buddha, of course, I was privileged to be and spend my time in Bodhgaya town. But one of the things that I took away from it is that today Bodhgaya is being, projected as India's connection to the Buddhist world. But Bodhgaya is also a site of Dalit resistance, and that history is radically being erased. It's radically being, the layered history of Bodhgaya. There's only a history that is being projected to the world, and that is the Buddhist history, Bodhgaya Buddha, the ancient history. The history of the oppression of the Mutt, or the Bodhgaya Mutt, or even the fact that Dalits, Bhuiya Dalits in particular, resisted against the Mutt and was able to get 10,000 acres of land. That is not a history that is known in the region, that is kind of discussed in the region. And so for those of us who are not aware or familiar with Bihar, Bihar is known as the Flaming Fields. It's the site of a lot of caste massacres starting from the 1970s onwards to, say, the 2000s. And so in this context, where there has been a lot of armed activity, a lot of, killings, caste killings has happened. And those caste killings are primarily in the realm of land and acts of Dalit assertion, like wages for 1 kg of rice or clean rice. Those are those brutal retaliations are what defines Gujarat's agrarian, Bihar's agrarian, agrarian milieu, agrarian political economy. And so I wanted to kind of bring us and say, you know what? To this town, which has a lot of legacies, it has a cemented, contesting, simultaneous. The histories are there. However, only one history is being posited. I'm going to read out here. The ancient Buddhist legacy of the town often works to obscure the fact that the Mutt, Bodhgaya Mutt's power and control over the region was considered absolute and was said to be, has been so for centuries. The Mutt was established in 16th century. It was the biggest and most powerful landlord in the region until the Bodhgaya land movement was launched against it in the late 1970s. To give a sense of the religious monastic, and I say religious monastic because it's a religious institution, but it's also a monastic institution, but it also is a feudal institution because it's acting as a landlord. grip of the Mutt had over, I want to briefly sketch why and more importantly, how it was able to control the Dalit, the outcast in the Bodhgaya for nearly 5 centuries, even as the region witnessed drastic changes in regime. It is looking much better now. This was back in 2013. The picture has been taken. And so I'm going to give you a brief history of how this came about. This Mutt came about in Bodhgaya. Although established before the British made India their colony, the Mutt power and coffers witnessed substantial increase under British colonialism. There were 2 primary reasons for this. First, the British not only recognized the Mutt's hold over the region, but also permanently settled land in its favor and accepted its control over the Mahabodhi temple. This was done because the Mutt guaranteed a steady flow of revenue to the British, which was their primary concern. Second, unlike other parts of British India, which witnessed Hindu-Muslim riots and clashes among various Hindu factions, Bodhgaya was quote-unquote quiet and free from Hindu-Muslim tensions. In fact, it is safe to assume that the peace in Bodhgaya throughout the independence movement is a strong indicator that the Hindu Mutt was comfortably ensconced in the region with no serious challenge to its authority. The Mutt was so adept at adjusting to changing times and regimes that post-independence, it easily circumvented legislative efforts meant to undercut the power of landlords by imposing a limit on the land an individual could hold. To overcome the legislative challenge, the monastery ironically donated land for a university. We know it today as Magad University, and a retreat center for Gandhian activists who were leading a land donation campaign for the landless people in Bihar. And for those of us who are familiar with Indian history or social movements, it's referring to Vinoba Bhave, and there is the what do you call? I think Dwarka Sundarani was there at that time. He's no longer. He passed away, but he was heading the what do you call ashram, which is adjacent to the Mutt. The monastery either sold off land, particularly land located on the boundaries of its vast estate, to its trusted aides and officials, or willed the estate to various trusts it had created to mask its ownership. So I just want to show some of it's at that time it seemed to be in ruins. The current system or the current situation, I think it has seen an uptick in its fortunes. So I'm now pivoting to kind of describe the Bodhgaya land movement, Bodhgaya movement. The Bodhgaya land movement of the late 70s was the only serious challenge that the Mutt had encountered in its nearly 5 centuries reign in the region. The Chhatra Yuva Sangharshvani, a socialist, basically Jayaprakash Narayan, who was Lok Nayak, also known as Lok Nayak, people's leader. He during the Bihar movement, or he was known as the intellectual leader of the Bihar movement, and he formed the Chhatra Yuva Sangharshvani, a non-politically affiliated students group to kind of lead social change and his idea of total transformation of society. And so I'll just describe what Chhatra Yuva Sangharshvani was, whose membership was restricted to youth under the age, so I think it's from 14 to 13 years of age, was the force behind the peaceful. And I put peaceful in quote because it's not ahimsa. It's peaceful because, we'll go there. Hopefully somebody will ask around the Q&A. The middle class, educated, caste privileged youth who were wedded to socialist ideals organized the Mutt's landless agricultural laborers. The Vaini also forced the state to redistribute to these laborers nearly 10,000 acres of land that the monastery has been holding on to under forged trust created under the names of its priests, animals, and deities. So what I noticed at that time is that now, if anybody is aware of land reforms in Bihar, Bihar is the failed state, and one does not understand or one does not what do you call, where was I? I thought there was an indication of time. I don't know how much time I have, but Bihar is usually considered as a failed state, and land reforms is the story of land reforms in Bihar is that it has failed. But given that this movement was actually redistributed not in terms of paper, but redistribution of land, and these were for Bhuiya Dalits who were enslaved as kamiyas in the region. So that was a huge thing to come from that state. But what the scholarship at that time indicated to me was that the movement was the first social movement in South Asia to seriously engage the women's question and make women's rights to independent land titles a central issue. This is very important because social movements have relied on women to kind of do the organizing. But once it comes to the point where they're saying now land needs to be redistributed, the general diktat or to the women is that now you need to go back to the kitchen. In this case, women were actually leaders. Women, both Dalit and non-Dalits, were leaders of the movement, and they articulated that women should get land to independent land titles. And in this case, there were a group of some 100 women, unmarried women, who got land titles. And for me as a Bihari, the question was, how did this happen? Because the reform, the gender reforms or making inheritance laws gender neutral only happened in 2005. And we're talking about within a period of 1978 to 1986. The second is that if the movement successfully forced a hostile state apparatus to grant legal titles in favor of women, even though there were no legal provisions or precedents that supported property rights for Hindi women at that time. This discrepancy existed even though the Constitution guarantees equal citizenship to both women and men, a fact that the movement used to get the state to grant land titles to women. Gender bias in property rights of Hindu women was addressed only in 2005, nearly 3 decades after the struggle's radical achievement. The third point was that it set a precedent by breaking away from the practice of granting only widowed women land titles. Following the land struggle, all women, irrespective of the status, were seen as eligible to have land rights. And even this was important as social movements in India, and I think I kind of talked about it even before this, but I'll read this out, have disproportionately relied on women for their success and mass appeal, and yet women's role has largely been understood as supportive. By recognizing women's right to land, the Bodhgaya movement gendered the land to the tiller question slogan and recognized women and farmers. And this is where Beena Agarwal's work comes in, where she basically asks this question, are we not peasants too? And she uses the Bodhgaya land movement to kind of show as an example of how social movement, particularly this, has challenged that idea. It challenged the process whereby women's labor and contribution in the family are made visible. Please let me know the time. I timed it to 45 minutes, but the fourth point is the Bodhgaya land movement was a peaceful movement, meaning that the Vahini activists did not proactively solicit violence as a means to effect change. This too appeared unfathomable given the deep-rooted hierarchical structure and chronic inequality that characterizes the Bihar region. Since India became independent in 1947, the state of Bihar has consistently ranked lowest in almost all indices, including poverty, landlessness, and acute social and economic disparity. Even though 89%, over 80% of the state's population is said to be residing in rural areas, it has the highest number of very large landholders in India, as well as large landless population. As a journalist, as a Bihari, with an intimate knowledge of the monotonous frequency and propensity of caste-related massacres and violence that have occurred in Bihar from the 1970s onwards to early 2000, I found the land movement's success astounding, to say the least. The existing scholarship that tells us these things, however, does not tell us anything about the experiences of the women who secured legal rights to redistributed land, nor does it fully account for the actual nature of transformation that the movement ushered in the region. For example, ethnographic fieldwork shows us that women who got land titles, more often than not, transferred the lands to the sons, thereby obfuscating the most overt gendered game and the game that we are trained to recognize as feminist consciousness of the land movement. Second, following the withdrawal of the movement, Dalits, including women, have lost their hard-fought land primarily due to resistance from landed elites who made claims and counterclaims on the land once the movement was declared over. Third, there have been no follow-up from the state or the movement to ensure women's effective control. And I use the word effective control as to kind of distinguish between having papers versus actually being able to work on the land. And this is a concept that Agarwal has used. Lastly, there is a multiplicity in results and outcomes of the land movement in the region that cues us that although the long-term overt gendered impact of the movement might seem to be waning, there is, as Maya asserts, badlao, transformation in her life and that of her community. I posit that studying the movement primarily through the lens of gender and development fails to account for the transformation that Maya is alluding to. Her narrative skews us to the complexity of her subject positions and how the interplay of those subject positions shaped lived reality. She identifies herself not only as a woman, but also a former slave of the mud who, through her engagement with the land movement and by acquiring land rights, successfully overcame a life of bondage. Here are Maya's own words. Had it not been for the movement and the land we have our control now, we would still be working as kamiyas. All the members of we were doing some work or the other for less than 6 pounds of rotten, unhusked rice or wheat for a day's work. There was no work during the non-agricultural season. We would go hungry most of the time and survive on all sorts of grass, husk soup, and water. We were forced to live like animals, with animals. Our hair would be matted and there was barely enough clothes to cover us. They talk about the women, the children being naked and well into puberty, they would have to roam around naked. Today, nobody can force us to do anything against our wish. Today, no longer face that kind of indignity and scarcity, be it food or clothing. Now, apart from illustrating the social history of those at the bottom of caste hierarchy under the mud, Maya's narrative allows us to institutional form of bonded slavery practiced in South Bihar and the critical role that control over productive assets such as land plays. So what I'm saying is that the experiences of the women and men in the Bodhgaya land movement demonstrates why land reform cannot be put on the side burner, why it continues to be an important mechanism to challenge caste-mediated gendered hierarchies. A kamiya was a landless bonded slave, or a laborer whose ability to reside in the village hinged solely on his acceptance of kamiyati or bondage to the landlord. A kamiya was viewed as the property of the landlord, just like land and other assets. A landlord's kamiya was divided equally among the heirs. Kamiyas in Gaya district belonged to Bhuya caste, considered as lowest of lowest in the hierarchies. They form the bulk of the beneficiaries of the Bodhgaya land movement. This form of caste-based discrimination is similar to slavery in the United States, although unlike the US, it has religious basis, not legal. The overt practice of kamiyati continued in Gaya district well into the 1990s. So I just want to kind of mark the significance of the movement because legislation was passed in 1995 that declared bonded slavery as illegal, 1950s. But this was continued to be practiced. And so the importance of the movement in kind of doing away with this kind of aggressive slavery. In fact, in Maya's village, the Mat, following the legal limit on how much land a religious institution can hold, sold off its land, including the small patch it had granted to its bonded slaves in exchange for the bondage. So it's called the Gharari Zameen or homestead land to the officials in the village who normally belonged to caste considered higher in the hierarchy. When the Dalits protesting their eviction from the village and selling off the land on which their thatched roof had stood, when they protested, the Mat officials said, when there is no Mat, whose kamiya are you? You have no basis to live in the village. To this, Dalits kind of briefly had to accept the kamiyati of the landed elites, the dominant caste in the village. Following the transfer of land, Maya noted that her bondage was transferred to the newly created landed elites in her village. Mat officials in the village is said to have dissuaded the head priest of the Mat From granting Dalit Bhuiya families 16 acres of land, these officials said that the untouchable in the village used to grudge when they got 6 pounds of unhusked rice as a daily wage. Imagine what will they do to a woman when they get an acre of land. Now I find this linking of giving Dalits land to non-Dalits, saying that giving Dalits land is posing a threat to non-Dalit, posing a threat to non-Dalit women by Dalit men. And this is where I think the linkage of gender and caste becomes more salient. The Mutt, after listening to the plea of the non-Dalits of the dominant caste in the village, is said to have immediately backtracked, leaving the Dalit community at the mercy of the newly landed elites. These elites reasoned that Dalits had not known anything else but community and had nowhere else to go. So the non-Dalits or the knowledge that caste itself, the institution of caste, and how it was being exploited by the newly created elites in that village that Maya belongs to. Now, this particular narrative draws into focus the anxieties around retaining purity and supremacy of caste and caste hierarchies, a purity and supremacy that are achieved primarily through control over women's sexuality. Salaja Pike has the wonderful book, Vulgarity of Caste, where she links the Masha to agrarian art forms as very much rooted in agrarian relationships. And something that I kind of draw on. But that is what she kind of goes into detail as to how caste, sex, and sexuality linked. And this is another instance where you see that where there is anxiety with Dalit land ownership. Non-Dalits' anxiety is articulated around their own women's bodies, and they're seen that as being threatened by Dalit, newly Dalit land owners. This visceral response to Dalit assertion oftentimes gets articulated around the bodies of caste women and forms the justification for denial of Dalit rights. The land grab that ensued following the dissolving of the Mutt's power at the boundaries of its vast estate allowed some monastic officials to appropriate the power of the Mutt in Maya's village and further subjugate Dalits. The waning of the Mutt's centuries-old control over the Bhuiya Dalit community led Dalit families in Maya's village to experiment with various forms of mobilization, including the armed Naxalite movement, before deciding to work solely with the Bodhgaya movement. Now, what I want to say is two things. The Mutt headquarters was residing in Bodhgaya. Now, with this new elite, local elite, what they were doing is that they put them in very close proximity. So the oppressor and the oppressed were in very close proximity. So the degree of oppression increased rather than decreased. Also because non-Dalits now had to gain directly from the agricultural produce, the surveillance on Dalits, Bhuiya Dalits, increased. So all in all, their situation worsened before it could become better. The other thing I want to kind of point out, and that I point out in my book, is that movements cannot be taught into isolation, and that I go back as far as the 1930s to kind of think about the kinds of mobilization that was happening in the region. The Naxalite movement was something that Bhuiya Dalits in Kari experimented with. One of the things that they asked, and I hope I haven't written about this here, but one of the things that they talked about is how they were perplexed with this idea of resisting in the dark when the oppressor is out in the open. And that was something that sat with me and kind of alerted me as to why these narratives do not make into mainstream knowledge. Because here is one instance, or at least multiple instances, where Dalits are discerning what forms of resistance are applicable. They joined the Naxalite movement not because they wanted to, but because there was no other movement that was willing to accept them and champion their cause. The government shooed them away. There were others who were not willing to work with them. And so that was the option that was available. And so when the Bodhgaya land movement came to the forefront, they readily partook in it and joined it. And so I'm trying to kind of underscore the agency, Dalit agency, in discerning forms of mobilization that works for them. Over time, I learned from Maya that the Mutt's religious identity worked to legitimize, enforce, and even normalize debilitating social practices like instituting prostitution as tradition, particularly among lower caste, Dalits and outcasts. Although the temple priest was sworn to a life of celibacy, they actively partook in sexual exploitation of women. Maya notes that under the old tradition, newly wed non-Dalit women were supposed to spend the first night at the local court of the mutt before being granted permission to live with their husbands. If a male Kamya's woman was not to the liking of the temple or the Kacheri officials, Kacheri is court, the Kamya would be asked to remarry at the mutt's expense. Here it must be noted that it was not just the Kamya who were subjected to sexual slavery. Middle caste women were particularly susceptible to the kept women tradition, or the Rakhel Pratha, that derogatory termed as Rakhel Pratha. What I'm saying is that Kamya women, the women, were not given a subject. They were defined in relationship to the Kamya men. So bondage of their men, and so they were very much they were very much disposable or considered disposable if they were not to the liking of the officials that were residing in kacheris, local kacheris. The mutt basically had so it was centered in Bodhgaya, but it had I think courts in different villages through which it kind of managed its agrarian enterprise. I think in one of I forget the year, but in one survey I think it had 53 kacheris in and around Bodhgaya region through which it managed its feudal enterprise. Maya's attributes the demise of exploitive and dehumanizing caste-mediated gendered practices to the land movement and to land ownership. The movement facilitated the redistribution of land to bonded slaves, and in the process ruptured the institutionalized economic dependency on the mutt. They reiterated time and again, Zameen sahyog hai, sahara hai, meaning land is the source of sustenance. No matter where we go looking for work during agricultural off seasons, we have the comfort in knowing that our families have a roof over their heads, and that if for any reason we do not find work, our family and children won't go hungry. It is this legacy of servitude that Maya referred to when she said badlao, change, is a very big word for me. It is beyond our imagination that we could ever see an end to the mutt's grip over our lives. She noted that the watershed moment of land distribution appeared to be a key to their lives. It can be characterized as a short celebratory phase in what seems a long struggle to realize the politics of becoming and belonging that proactively challenges and appends practices of social exclusion and marginalization. I'll skip the quotes and I'll just kind of read the conclusion. Her narrative acknowledges change, but concurrently underscores the tenuous and marginal nature of the change that has taken place, undermining the celebratory aspect of change and calling for a scrutiny of the resistance that Dalit assertion faces in the present. The stunted, what is stunted? It means in terms of, instead of 4 kg of rotten grains, you're getting 4 kg of clean grains. So that's why I'm saying the stunted quantitative grains of the movement offers insights into what Abu Lughod notes study of resistance, that resistance should be used as a diagnostic of power. And so how caste operates in society and why it is different, what is the kind of resistance that Dalit assertion are facing. It mandates an engagement with intersectionality that not only takes into account gender and development, but also the marginalized caste and class of Dalit women. Class positions. Dalit assertions of basic rights, such as right to live with dignity, continue to be heavily contested in rural Bihar, and for that matter, anywhere else in India. More often than not, these assertions are met with violence. In conclusion, while the land movement has primarily been viewed as a successful case of studying and demanding and achieving women's right to land, my research has shown that Dalit women who were prime beneficiaries of the land movement redistribution of land marked the end of only material dispossession that characterized Dalit existence and made their lives tenuous. For Dalits, the Bodhgaya land movement merely marks the end of one phase of the struggle, while forming the basis of several other forms of struggle. Dalits in Bodhgaya are now proactively engaged with the politics of becoming that is no longer content with the mere inclusion. Rather, the effort has shifted to actively contesting the processes of social exclusion and erasure. I'll just go through the photographs that I had to kind of give you a context as how the kind of sources I'm using and why do I kind of call it a feminist and anti-caste movement. These are pictures of the kacheri that I took in 2009. These are, again, former, the person, what do you call it, standing next to the burnt orange shirt. He is a former Kamya, who's now the leader of the Mazdoor Kisan Samiti. And they're very much active in kind of addressing common organizing resistance, or they're very much involved in the movement even today, even though it does not have the same what do you call participation or the enthusiasm like it was in the 70s. But the movement continues, much muted, but nevertheless it's present. This is another kacheri that I was talking about. How did this entity that was located in Bodhgaya maintained its vast estates? They were local kacheris, both that served as storing grains as well as disciplining primarily of Bhoya Dalits. I wanted to show pictures of the movement. This is the movement where women were at the forefront. Women were the ones who were, they disproportionately relied on feminized forms of resistance. What are feminized forms of resistance? Women being on the forefront, women leading charges, proactively creating or having discussions of why is it that women are subservient or women's position are subservient in society. This is also a movement where urban and rural women came together to kind of focus on how to emancipate around a radical idea of total transformation, which in Hindi would mean Sampurna Kranti, which is JP's idea, Jayaprakash Narayan's idea of Sampurna Kranti. And you can see in this picture by the way the sari has been draped as to the urban and the rural presence in the movement. The ones that have been draped like from the front back, urban, the one from the back front or having a gungat or covering the head, rural. But these are Bhuiyan Dalit women who were leaders and very militant leaders who actually stood in front of police and countered lathi charge. Another picture, this is, if those of us who visited Bodhgaya, this is the main gate. It is no longer visible if you go to Bodhgaya, but this is the gate where the protest is happening. And to think about, you know, bonded slaves, agrestic slaves, centuries old of slavery, and they protesting out in the open is an act of resistance that is very difficult to imagine. I also want to point out where the police is standing and the role of the police in protecting the status quo rather than protecting the law. So that is something that I wanted to kind of point out at that point of time. Here are women, Bhuiyan Dalit women, who were lathi charged upon by the police as the movement, I think until, as the movement progressed, I think the police brutality increased. And this is one instance of it. I do wanted to show this picture. They talked about how they would survive on leaves during non-agricultural seasons because there was nothing else to do and they could not go and seek work elsewhere. And so that this is another kind of showing the kind of deprivation that was characteristic in that region. And this becomes more important because Bodhgaya is a site or the seat of Buddhism. And so and if people have gone to Bodhgaya, Mastipur is a village that was created particularly by the Sri Lankan government. And so it looks like an urban slum at this point of time. And so I'm just trying, the reason I mentioned this is to point to the sedimented history of that region and what histories are being recognized, what voices are being heard, and what voices are being subsumed or ignored. This is again through the fields of Mastipur. These photographs were given by Bahini activist Prabhat. I think one of the only books that exist is his book, Jameen Kiski Jote Uski. It's a memoir. And I basically, what I'm trying to do right now is create an archive of the movement. I want just kind of just showing that this is a movement. Look at the women's faces and the men's faces. And these are not passive women. These are active women. The movement, I write in my book, has readily accepted, or both men and women, and the readily adopted feminized forms of resistance. And it is to the credit of the women leaders, but also to credit to the men who actually adopted them and kind of brought them and helped realize them. So that is the complexity that I talk about in my book. This is their own fields, and these are some pictures. These are her own fields, different activities that are being done when I was there during field work. A song that I had recorded, I will not play in the interest of time. Okay, I'll stop here, and then
Yes.
maybe if you all have questions.
Yes. Thank you for so detailed information about the land. We're still struggling. We still have a lot to go with this land. And as Dr. Baba Sahib argued, that the land holding was a crucial for social standing, and stating a person holding land has a higher status than a person not holding land. So with this, Mark, I'll open this forum for asking a question answer session. Please raise your hand for question answers. Currently, I don't see anyone's hand in Indulata, but I do have a question, personal, what's motivate you to study about this social transformation, like this, especially about this subject? Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And like I said, I am Bihari. I am not Brahminical, but I am from a dominant caste. I am land owning. I have a family history of resistance. And I'm a journalist. I was a journalist. And one of the things that I what struck me when I read about this is basically women got land, and my own subject position and my own struggles with trying to control over land and the kind of resistance I faced kind of motivated me to understand how did they do it, and that too in the 1970s, and that too in Bihar. I have traveled extensively in Bihar. I speak Bhojpuri. I was like, how did this happen? And literally, it started as a journalistic inquiry that landed me into a doctoral dissertation because I wasn't getting my answers. And it's a 2 decades journey. And I'm trying to present work that I've done. And now I'm working with the kids in the region. And I thought I had pictures of that, but I'll try to find out and just kind of show the kind of work that I'm doing right now, because one of the things that when I presented my work to the community, they said, you know what, good, you've done all this work, but the children don't remember this. They don't know their history. They don't want to work on the land. And so to kind of just take that invitation or that concern seriously, I started training the youth in the community to document their stories. And that is a project that I thought it would be done in 6 months, and lo and behold, it's 6 years now. And I'm still working on that. So there are 2 or 3 things that I'm working on with the community in the hope that this is a history that needs to be told. We often hear of Dalit history of marginalization. And I'm saying this is a radical history. They got land. They forced the Mutt, which is an institution in and of itself, to get land. Why is this history not told? Why don't we? So I feel like this is a positive history that needs to be told, told in different mediums. And I'm glad I'm the one doing it. Like I said, this was a very feminist inquiry, and I realized that caste has a lot to do with it, and it was a process of understanding and recognizing that literally listening and being in conversation with Dalit scholars when they're talking about why is it so hard to represent Dalit voices. And so it has been a praxis of how do I use the received knowledge and kind of use, how do I change that? So Audre Lorde said the master's tool cannot dismantle the master's house. So as a scholar, my job is to understand, so what are the new tools out there that I need to kind of learn to tell the story? That was one. The second thing that kind of was very annoying that I felt ashamed of is that I read Babasaheb Ambedkar in 2005, Annihilation of Caste. And I come from a very progressive, radical family, and my father read Babasaheb Ambedkar in 2005, and my family read that in 2005. And we were stunned at the level of censorship, or the level at which we don't get to read. So the question at that time for us was that why did we read him in our school? This is primary text, and struggling with that. And yeah, I'll stop there. But I'm just saying that it has been a journey to come to this point, and I'm glad the book is there. It tells a story, and I'm hoping somebody else will tell a better story. But that's my offering. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I do have more questions, but I'll let other people ask question. I can see Kranti Tai, your hand. Go ahead, Kranti Tai. Go ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Kalpana. And thank you, Ms. Indulata, for your inquiry and curiosity, and also bringing women's struggle to this forum and showcase their strength. So my question is, you mentioned in your talk that you would like to explain about peaceful and ahimsa demonstrations. So I just wanted you to comment a little bit on that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for asking that question. So peaceful, basically, so the activists were very clear that peaceful is not that if somebody hits you, you put the other face in front. It was what the activists did was that they proactively tried to undermine the possibility of violence. One of the things that they did is whenever there was a march or a protest, they would let the police know. There were ways in which they would inform everyone that what they were doing. So they weren't doing anything in hiding. They were putting information out in the open. So so that they could get the state. So they weren't saying the state is bad. They were asking the state's support to kind of force the state to act its own rules. The movement was basically, there is a law, implement the law. And so it did not take an antagonistic position with the state. Rather, it used the state machinery, and it understood the state not as a homogeneous entity. It understood the state as, it applied pressures at different points. Some pressures worked, some pressure did not work. They had deep alliances, and this could come because it was the preceding movement was Bihar movement of 1971. 71, 72, where JP was leading the movement. Now, Jayaprakash Narayan is a socialist leader. He's very immensely popular in India, but more popular in Bihar. And JP's, there were a lot of sympathizers. So there was it R.K. Narayan? There was justices who were sympathetic. And these are youth that are coming from affluent families, and they have great social capital. So they are judges, they are politicians' children, all of them are there, lawyers, activists. They are children of those people who are in places. And I think it has also to do with the memory of the, social movement, memory of the independence struggle. And so the socialist strain at that time was there, and they had well-wishers in different places, and they used all of that to kind of counter police brutality. Or, rumor is a great way of undermining, or false information is a great way of undermining a movement. And they used pamphleting a lot. they held shivers. So they would have shivers a lot. They would invite people from the outside world to have a conversation with them. There have been Dalit activists who do not have any formal education, but they call the shivers their classrooms. That's where they learned how to speak to power. So this consciousness, the feminist way of raising consciousness, where you are talking and debating a question. Questions like, why do women need to sit on chairs? Men need to sit on chairs and women on the floor. Questions like, why do our children have men's surname and not our surname? Questions like, why should the land only be in men's name? Because the men are alcoholic and they marry often, all of that. And then women are basically one caring. So these might seem questions at this point, like, I feel like they're even radical questions even today. But they were raising these questions in those conversations and raising the consciousness. So by having these conversations, it's not that the individual people who are partaking in this, at the whole level of the consciousness of the movement was being raised at that time. There was one question that came about to do away with all religious practices around marriage. And then one of the women said, you know what, as it is, men find it easy to divorce our women. So if we do away with the religious practice, they will find it more easy. So I'm just trying to point out the contestations and different viewpoints that was readily presented within the movement, that allowed for people to kind of gain an understanding as to what this movement is about, how to talk about hierarchy. And so when I visited the site after 2 decades, two or three decades, from 2009 onwards to 2015, they thought I was a Vahini person because I was not wearing any markers of marriage, and I was, and that is coming from my own upbringing. But for them, it was like I was there to start a movement, and it took me a year to kind of convince them that I was just a researcher trying to do research. So I digressed, Krantiji, but what I'm trying to say is that there was education, consciousness raising happening at all levels. And one of the things, and when the discussions would be happen during the day, they would even call they would invite the landed elites in the village to come and take part. They would invite. So contrary to other imaginations, there were alliances being built. The other thing that I felt was very unique about the movement was that JP directed the youth not to target the middle caste or the shareholders, sharecroppers, and rather the focus on the mutt. And I think that was very important because it was to because the mutt was trying to consolidate its power and consolidate resistance, opposition to the Bhuya Dalits. And so by not targeting the middle caste peasants, that consolidation did not become Dalit versus non-Dalits, because the only demand that was put to the non-mutt landowners was you need to give clean food, the wages need to be proper, you cannot give them food that is not apt for animals. So there was different strategies being applied at different level that mitigate. It is not to say that violence did not happen, like there was police brutality increased over a period of time when they were gaining momentum. But the effort was to do everything in your possible to minimize, to mitigate a violence situation, because the understanding was that violence often becomes the justification to discredit the movement. And I talk about it in the book.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I have another question from Rajesh Chandraji. Go ahead, Rajesh Chandraji, unmute yourself.
Yeah. So I think your previous question was very interesting. Actually, I got two questions. So you mentioned about the JP movement. So I think the JP movement was led by the upper class and caste, right? And so,
Yes.
so do you think their involvement was key towards the success of this movement? What I'm saying that right? Okay, yeah.
I do. Rajesh, I'm sorry I interrupted. Please finish your question.
No. So this is my first question. After this, I have my second question. Sorry.
Do you want to say that so I can take
Yeah. So the other question was that And I guess the region is basically known for the Naxalite movement, right? The Gaya region, right? So what is the role of that movement towards this what you have talked about?
Yeah, thank you so much. So this is what I actually say, that the movement actually kind of shows that one can challenge casteism, and the way to do that is it's basically a coalition politics where there was a radical alliance between urban educated non-Dalit youth and the Dalit and marginal community within the rural. So there was a rural-urban alliance that was radical. The other thing that was happening is that the Vahini's commitment to centering the Antim Jan, the last person in society, and they identified rightly so because of the presence of Vahini women, that the last person in society is the Dalit women. And when you center the Antim Jan, and so the movement was being animated by the concerns of the Antim Jan, which in this case was rightly identified as the Dalit women. And the Vahini women were central to kind of articulating gendered concerns, bringing the gendered concerns. But the other thing that I want to point out is that there were only a handful of Vahini men and women in the field. The majority, the bulk was about Dalits. And so this trying to understand that this kind of coalition is important to challenge. And this is, I think, this is what I'm trying to offer, that we need to recognize. And so the Vahini themselves were challenging caste by doing away with their last name. One can have a critique of that, because even if you do away with your last name, you cannot do away with the caste privilege that you inherit. But they were also doing away with they were doing away with markers of caste. They were doing away with markers of marriage. They were questioning customs. They were doing away with dowry. They were the ones who were advocating for intercaste marriages, which was Baba Saheb and Ambedkar's stance as well. So they were the ones who were doing these things. So there was questioning in that space. There is also raising of consciousness as to why these questions need to be raised. So I'm just saying there are multiple sites in which these conversations are happening. And because of this confluence, and I actually talk about in my book where I'm saying that a lot of we came to this moment. The fact that the Vahini already had experience during the Bihar movement made it much more mature to handle the village. They did not go to the agents of the Bhuiya Dalits. They directly went to the villagers, and they directly talked to them. So these were lessons learned, and these were the youth trying to be as close as possible to the mandate of total revolution, how to achieve that allowed for this result to take place. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have another question from Smita. Smita, go ahead and mute yourself.
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this session. Kalpana and Induji, thank you so much for coming and talking about your research. I want to understand. I have a couple of questions. First short question is, when you say Vahini, this is not Durga Vahini group, right?
No.
It's a different.
Yeah, it's Chhatra Yuva Sangharsh Vahini. And
Okay.
one has to know that JP during the Bihar movement did briefly align with the Sangh. And he has been castigated by that. So we do have a problematic history there. But understanding JP thinks that if you interact with them, you can change people. And he tried to do that in a village that was said to be the bastion of Naxalite movement, Mushari in Bihar. And he worked there for a year, but things did not change. So, and I think that informs his, I will write, it's Chhatra Yuva Sangharsh Vahini. I understand the anxiety around Vahini.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we clarify this.
Yeah.
And a second question is, how do you think the women from Bodhgaya are now able to contribute to the freedom movement that is going on with regards to Mahabodhi temple?
I don't think there is. I think there has been new. So I'm trying. I try very hard to be very optimistic. But here is where I feel like neoliberal forces. There has been. I'll try to be brief. I don't want to be negative, and I don't want to make claims. But one of the questions that I was asked is that how many temples do you need to worship? In Bodhgaya. Because Bodhgaya no longer, Bodhgaya is the temples and the foreign investment in Bodhgaya is pushing the hard people who fought for land outside. And so it's I would say the situation is dire, and calls for a critical understanding of what is going on there in that space. Yeah. So I'm saying that the situation is I in my own research have not encountered any proactive organizing. There is organizing already. So the movement from Bodhgaya, the movement has shifted outwards, and so there is organizing happening around Forest Right Act, which I'm studying. There's organizing happening around taking over Gair-Mazurwa, the government land that I'm studying. Recently, the government of Bihar has said that they are doing digitization of land records. And so for a concern for me is that how will digitization of land records impact people whose parvanas, the legal document that they got to the redistributed land, is being contested, or they have lost their parvana, or to government lands that they have controlled for, say, a decade or two. So it has opened a new can of questions that has direct implications for Dalit relationship or Dalit ownership of land. And that is something that I'm moving towards, because this new move to digitize land records is basically, and the way it's doing is that you come and record it. So the government has not done its due diligence and they are going ahead. So I'm thinking that that might have direct implications for Dalit land ownership. I'll stop there.
Yes, we have another question from Vivek Dada. Vivek Dada, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Kalpana, and thank you, Dr. Indulata ji, for coming over and presenting your research work. Definitely, it's a lot detailed, and we see this caste issues going on for generations, and you have been addressing that in your book and your research as well. So now your book is out. You talked a lot about the women's plight and the fight to acquire the land and all that thing. Now, what is the next step how that your book research work would benefit the community back home in Bihar? Is there any next method that you are addressing that the government will pay attention to this work and the issues that you are addressing?
So this is what I've been doing. I don't know. I'm just going to show some pictures. This girl was she was the age of my daughter, who I showed in the picture. Now she's 17. So what I'm doing now is basically training them. I've given. So this was in 2021, where I got funding and I gave youth training to document their own stories from the community. So what I've done is basically, it's called Youth Community Driven Archive. The goal is to basically train the youth. So the movement was in a lot of villages, 50 plus villages. I just studied 2 or 3. And so the goal is to make an archive of the movement. And the way I'm trying to do this is train the youth. This will answer, or this will at least address the concern that elders had in the community, that you are taking away all the knowledge and our youth don't know anything. So I'm hoping that this can be a small way to do that. I'm just trying to, oh God. This way it's better, I guess. And the second thing, so the youth community-driven archive, what I've done is I've invited youth, I've kind of held workshops in Bodhgaya. I can just go through some pictures, and the goal is, I'll just summarize it. The goal is to, one is the archive, because I feel it's very important to tell histories, history of, achieving so much. This is a radical history. So one is that. The second, I'm working with filmmakers to have a short film from the perspective of the youth. So documenting that process of archiving, but also kind of relaying the film so that people within the region can actually understand. Because when I present, even though I speak in Hindi, if you spend too much time in the US, your Hindi also becomes anglicized or get more English words. And so I don't think it's conducive. So I've been trying to get the film there. And the third is to understand the rural-urban divide. So one of the challenges that I faced is that low levels of literacy in Bihar. And when in trying to do this workshop, what I realized is that girls don't have phones, and they are not given phones. And boys have phones, but they do not use it for ways that are positive. Let's put it that way. And so, given my work in the community for over 2 decades now, the families have been willing to trust me and send their girls to training. I invite anybody who wants to sit and observe, and so I think those things have helped. So there is trust building that I'm working with the girls and the boys to train them to do this recording, to do the film, but also I'm hoping that to document the digital the impact, the gender and caste impact of Bihar State's digitization of land records. I'm hoping that I can use these youth as research, like they can partake with me as researchers, and we can do research together, like write and research together. So that's the next goal. I can just go through. I don't have. These are youth that I'm working with, girls that I've invited. These are the things that I was talking about. This is me from the US talking to them in India through Zoom and WhatsApp. So all I'm saying here is that, and the people who are mentoring them are people from the movement. So I have Kailash ji and Tikam Singh ji who were involved with Kailash ji was involved with the Bodhgaya land movement. He was the president of Mazdoor Kisan Samiti. They are the mentors. So I'm trying to do alliances where there is some mentoring that is happening, and that they can both learn their own legacy, and also what do you call? Also contribute to knowledge production. And so the effort here is now, instead of me going in the field and staying in the field, to work with them to do the research process. It's a difficult task, given that it's not just about. So I think I'm still working on developing a curriculum to address the specific needs that I have understood over the past 3 years. So what might be done to help the kid, I keep calling them kids, help the youth be more involved. 3 things that came out. One of the girls said, I did not know I can ask questions. One of the boys said, हमको तो ये लगता था कि सरकार जमीन दी है, and which translates as, I always thought the government gave land. Now I know that they fought and took land. That's a huge shift for a child to understand that these are not things that the state has given, that was a fought thing. There during these what do you call these workshops, questions of caste, questions of gender, questions of religion, all of them come up, and we've talked about that. So I'm saying that embodying some of the practices that the Vahini, I feel like I'm doing some of that, but on a very small scale, because this is very. It is so I have to write grants, and if grants don't come, then it's your own. Like, you do your own thing, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm excited about this. So I don't know if I answered your question, but this is what I'm community-driven archives. youth community-driven archives is what I'm experimenting with. And I'm trying to see if research can be done differently, if knowledge can be produced, not under my name, but as the group of the youth that I'm working. So in that process, it does multiple tasks. I'll stop there. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Indulata ji. I will, Kalpana, if I may ask, just do a follow-up question. Definitely, I still feel there is, I don't know, I won't disagree on most point, but I wanted to ask the follow-up questions. Have you suggested or put your suggestion, understanding um, the findings of your research work, the pitfalls in the society, the women are still struggling, the landless women are there in the community, particularly from the Dalit backward classes. Have you suggested any research work to the government that these are the findings, and 8 after 1950, since the constitution took place, 8 we are far behind implementing and given the due to our community who is lag behind?
So I've presented at the I'll share one experience, and I think I've been in. So when the movement is happening, I've talked to the DMs, and I kind of do more work. I kind of work with them at some points or the other. But I was presenting at the Right to Food Act when it was passed in 2013 at ANSNI Institute, and I was on a panel. And I suggested the importance of land reform, and I said these people actually they're there. They say this is our skill. This is what we do. We don't need aid. We don't need this. This is what I do. So the panel disagreed. They said land reform is a closed chapter, but the audience was clapping, and like the audience was very enthusiastic. So I'm just saying that I think there is little enthusiasm to understand, or enthusiasm both by the current, particularly in the current climate. In fact, the current government came on the promise of land reforms, and yet once it was in power, it quickly jettisoned it. So, and more, I think I try to do my work with the community. So I haven't had the chance to talk to people, or I haven't had people in the government wanting to listen to me. So that's the other truth. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, Vivekji, but what I'm trying to say is that there is the appetite. Like I have said this again and again, and I'm usually looked at that they see this as where that people actually think that this argument that land reforms is a must is a boat that has sailed long ago. And what I'm saying is that there is proof that if you want to address caste, first start addressing material disenfranchisement. And by material, I mean land and water, because that will fundamentally transform. And there are 2 papers that Kalpanaji mentioned, Casting Space and Dalit Ecologies, and both in which I say that this demonstrates that change is possible, and the kind of alliance that is needed. The book will come out in September 2025, and so we'll see if somebody wants to listen to me.
No, definitely. Thank you for, we definitely applaud the work that you have done. It is indeed, the part of Bihar you're talking about, where the women's education is so little, as you are mentioning already, compared to what we see in Maharashtra, and the other part where
Yeah.
the Ambedkarite community is very progressive in that, and they're very
Yes.
vocal about it when they see the disparities or injustices happening to us, to those ladies, so I think that is great, and is anything that we can do as the organization? Definitely we can collaborate, work together, to uplift those who left behind, and with the wisdom that you carry, the people from Ambedkarite community carries, definitely bring a change. We cannot look at the government all the time. We as a community leader definitely can make the change, the little by little, and seed by seed we grow the plant. I think definitely this indeed would make a change. But thank you for your time, and definitely we look forward for your book, and hopefully people will read it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Indulata, we have two questions. One is on a message, like as a non-Dalit feminist scholar researching on the Dalit issues, how do you reflect on your own positionality? The way Sharmila Reg used the nation of decasting. Do you also have any such construct?
No, I don't think I've proposed any construct. I think what I've been doing is being in critical relationship with my own positionality. And so one of the things that I talk about in my book is that I do share my caste position with the women, the only people in the field, because these are not, so caste is very charged in Bihar. Like I think as soon as I entered the field, somebody asked me, "What is your caste?" And I'm like, "I could be a Bhuya, I could be a Brahman, I could be anyone." So that is one way to kind of deflect it. But these are not, when you're working in the field, especially if you're asking questions of land. It was very hard because I was with my daughter at that time. There was what do you call to just put, I don't want to kind of exaggerate, but it felt like doing work on land and was hard. And so the only people that I was very truthful with was my interlocutors. They knew what my caste was. They knew where I was. They were the only people who knew I was in the US and I was working with them. And one of the things that they even agreed with is like, no, you don't want, these are not innocent questions, because I had just photocopied a parwana in one of the photocopying place, and I started getting calls on my phone. Like like I'm just saying that it's a space that I entered. I knew it was be tenuous, so I don't disclose my caste to anybody and everybody. Um, but what I say is that I'm non-Brahmin. I'm from dominant caste in Bihar, and I'm not a Dalit. So, but my interlocutors are the one that I've held dear, and I've offered them full disclosure. And I think what I've done is basically try to be mindful in terms of what I understand, or what I don't understand. And this is coming from a person who is born in who has an ancestral village in Bihar, born and brought up in Bengal, and having a family that is very that has been involved in social movements. Yeah. So I no, I don't actually. I actually deferred to Sharmila Rege in trying to what is the, so I think decasting is a process. I won't say I've reached, I've attained. I see decasting as a process, and I see decasting, and I see that I am engaged in that process. I will not say how good or how successful I am. I leave it to my interlocutors. I leave it to the people who are reading it. Yeah, but thank you for asking that question. I really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you. And we have another question from Ravi Kiran, and that will be the last question for the session. Go ahead, Ravi Kiran.
This is not a question, just a comment. Thank you, Indulata ji, for coming and explaining.
Can't hear you. Hello, Ravi. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I thank you, Indulata ji, for taking time and coming on to this Vihara. Your work is really commendable and it's very, very ground level. And definitely it will create some impact on the ground level. It's always fascinating to hear you and looking forward to meeting you in the Ambedkar Jayanti event on 19th April. Thank you.
Yes, Indulata, like I have like question like your book. Please send us a detail so we can put it everywhere. Your book and get into and also like how we can help you with the digitalizing this, because I think that visuals have more impact and it will be documented digitally as well as an archive. So just tell us how we can help you with that. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So what I've done is I've paused the. I want to basically study the challenges and come up. So I'm in the process of grant writing, and I want to kind of go. So I will be in India in May, and one of the things that I'm doing is trying to understand what is the kind of curriculum that is needed, because I'm also learning learning kind. So I didn't know that. There are very strange things, like for a girl to come to the workshop, I don't have to just talk to the one family member. I may have to talk to the brother, because the brother may be there are little things that I am having to work out, and I'm wondering what homework I need to do to kind of design a curriculum that they can follow. So like I said, I feel like I need to, like, this is something that I'm trying, and I need to do more, a little bit of more reflection and a little bit of more grounded. Like, I need to have those conversations to say, what does this look like? Because until now, I was trying to do both the book and the project, but that was not happening because I had to meet people like I would meet them in like the time difference makes it difficult, and just having two projects was not working. But I will reach out to you once I myself have a clear understanding of how this will look on the ground. Because
So last week's
and I
session, sorry,
yeah.
sorry.
So I was just saying I'm still figuring out what, because we've every time I think I understand it and I come back here, things fall apart. So I bought I got smartphones, I got a computer, but it requires a like it requires a structure that needs, that is sustainable, and somebody who can monitor this. It goes well when I'm there, but once I move out, it falls apart. And so I'm trying to understand might might that how to address that.
Yeah, so last week's session we have a journalist, and she is also she is a movie producer, Jyotnisha, because we are dedicating all this month for women. So she is the one of the Dalit women, like, who is working towards his documentary, what we talked about, like screening in ASU. We can definitely tie up with her, and then since you're going to India, we can help you with that typing up. Maybe we come up with something. Yes. Thank you for all your insight, research. Thank you for your time and being here in Anna's Vihara. We really appreciate your work, and we are looking forward for your new book.
I'm very, when I presented my dissertation, when I, like, even before I submitted it to my committee, I presented it to the community. That's where they started. Is like, what will I do with this work? Our children don't know. But I feel very privileged to have shared the book is finished, it's in production, and I really feel privileged to have shared it at this platform, my first platform to share the book. And so that's a privilege that I want to kind of share, and I'm so grateful you gave me that, and I was able to just talk about the work that I am very motivated by.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I really understand, because there are few people who wants to listen and hear and agreed. Yes, we are there. We are there to support you, and let us know how we can do it. We are always there. Thank you. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with this, Mark, we will close today's session. Thank you all participants. And we are going to have next month as a Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's Jayanti celebration month. And stay tuned for next Vihara. Thank you.
So I'll make a last comment. I think to appreciate all the work and the hosting done by Kalpana on the occasion of International Women's Month. Definitely it was a great hosting, and a lot of great speakers that you have invited and hosted them well, and the questions and all this. Question posted to the guests as well, they were very excellent, and thank you again. And this Anna each year does this to acknowledge the women's contribution to the society, and by inviting the people from the back marginalized community, giving them the platform, on the international stage. So this is indeed a great work, and the hosting, particularly done by the women during this month. Definitely they are always invited to do hosting throughout the year, but this special month is dedicated to the women. Okay, and thank you again for being with this on this Vihara. Okay, thank you, Kalpana.
Thank you, Dada.